Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're in the soaked and starving fields of medieval Europe during the Great Famine of 1315, where rain-heavy clouds hang low over flooded soil, and villages move through their days with a tired sort of hope. You're not a lord or a scholar, just an ordinary peasant trying to endure a year that has forgotten how to be kind. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You wake to the sound that has become the closest thing you know to certainty. A steady drumming, soft but relentless, tapping through the thatch above your head. Before your eyes even open, you can already sense the weight of the morning. The air carries the same cold dampness it carried yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that, an unbroken sequence smoothed together until time feels less like a line and more like a puddle spreading quietly across the floor. You stay still for a moment, letting the rhythm seep into you. It always finds a way. The rain has patience, more patience than people. It presses into the roof, the walls, the blankets, and eventually into your bones. You breathe in, slow and even, because rushing no longer serves a purpose. Even your breath has learned to conserve itself. When you sit up, the straw mattress sighs beneath you, as weary as you are. The cottage is dim, lit only by the soft grey that seeps through the small shutter gaps. You've grown used to this light, thin, colourless, obedient to the clouds. It gives everything the look of being slightly unfinished, as if the world is stuck between drafts. Your feet touch the packed earth floor, cool and slightly soft after weeks of moisture working its way in. The cottage walls smell faintly of wet wood, old smoke, and the mustiness of grain that was once stored with confidence and is now stored with apology. You run a hand along the edge of the table, feeling the damp grit that settles there overnight. Nothing truly dries anymore. Everything simply shifts from one degree of wetness to another. You move slowly, not out of caution, but because haste feels out of place in a world that has forgotten how to move forward. Each task you perform, pulling on your tunic, tightening the belt that grows looser with each passing week, feels rehearsed, procedural. Hunger changes how you engage with your own clothing. Even fabric seems to notice how much space you no longer take up. When you push open the cottage door, the hinges groan in a familiar way, as if complaining just enough to remind you that they too are tired. A curtain of grey rain greets you, falling in long straight threads, unbroken by wind. There's no drama in it, just endurance, the kind that doesn't care who watches. You step outside and the ground yields beneath you. Not fully mud, not fully soil, just something in between. The consistency of a thought losing its shape. Water pools around your ankles, seeping through the thin leather of your shoes with the efficiency of a tax collector. You take a breath, tasting the metallic tang of the morning air. It's cold enough to make your teeth ache, but at least cold has a purpose. Cold lets you feel something. Wetness only repeats itself. The fields lie ahead, or what used to be fields. They stretch out in a wide, low sprawl, bordered by the same hedges and fences, yet unrecognisable, all the same. Rows where crops once stood in careful, hopeful lines are now shallow trenches of brown water. The seedlings, those brave, naive little attempts at growth, are long gone, swallowed without ceremony. You walk the perimeter slowly, each step sinking a little deeper than the last. There is no point in pretending the land will recover quickly. Soil has a memory, but even memory has limits. You crouch down, run your fingers along the surface. It feels cold and lifeless, as though the earth is holding its breath and forgetting why. Worms used to wriggle away when disturbed. Now they float, pale and soft, reminders that even the smallest creatures are struggling to find a place in all this. Across the fields, the rain creates a faint haze, blurring the line between earth and sky. You blink, and the distance melts into a single wash of grey. It makes the world look strangely peaceful, in that indifferent, administrative way the weather has adopted. You can almost imagine someone somewhere checking a ledger, marking another day of rainfall, another day of loss, another sigh written into the margins. A crow perched on a fence post stares at you with the patient curiosity of something that still knows how to find food. Its feathers glisten under the constant drizzle, sleek and arrogant. It doesn't speak, but if it did, you imagine it would have the tone of someone offering unwanted advice. You nod at it because conversation, any conversation, feels increasingly rare. Your stomach grumbles, a low, curling sound that feels too large for your body. Hunger used to be an inconvenience. Now it is a schedule. It wakes when you wake. It walks where you walk. It comments on everything, growing louder when ignored. You've developed a habit of placing a hand against your abdomen, not to soothe it, but to acknowledge it. A small courtesy. Hunger seems to respect that. You turn toward the small storage shed near the side of your cottage. The roof sags a little more each week, heavy with moisture, but it still stands, an old mule of a building, too stubborn to collapse. Inside, the air is cool and stale. The sacks that once bulged with barley now slump inward, as though trying to shrink from your gaze. You lift one gently. It feels lighter than it should, lighter than memory insists it used to be. You measure a small portion into a wooden bowl, not enough to satisfy, but enough to keep going. You've learnt the art of making less feel like enough, stretching each handful until it resembles a meal in shape if not in substance. It's a kind of craftsmanship in its own bleak way. As you walk back to your cottage, you notice the rain softening into a finer mist, the kind that clings to your eyelashes and hair. It doesn't make you wetter, it simply rearranges the dampness. You step inside, closing the door with a push that feels heavier than it used to. The small hearth sits cold, the woodpile dwindling. You strike a spark and coax a faint flame to life. It takes longer now. Everything does. Even fire needs reminding. You sit beside the warmth, such as it is, stirring the thin mixture in your bowl. Steam curls upward, weak but determined. You hold the bowl close to your face, letting the small heat brush your cheeks. The taste is bland, almost apologetic, but you swallow it slowly, methodically. The act of eating feels like a quiet negotiation. You offer your body the bare minimum, and in return your body agrees to continue. Outside, the rain resumes its steadier rhythm, as if taking a brief pause had been a clerical error. You listen to it, the way one listens to a monotone storyteller whose tale never ends. It fills the silence, fills the cottage, fills the space inside your thoughts where more complicated feelings used to live. When you lie back on the straw mattress again, you feel the dampness seeping through the fabric. You exhale, long and slow, not out of frustration, but habit. You fold your hands over your abdomen, the way one might clasp a ledger closed at the end of a long day. The rain continues its steady accounting, marking the hours with patient indifference. As your eyes drift shut, you find yourself imagining the soil outside, not thriving, not even recovering, but simply waiting. You imagine roots trying to remember which direction growth used to come from. You imagine the world adjusting itself to a slower pace, as if preparing for a future that feels increasingly theoretical. The steady drumming above you never changes. It promises nothing. It comforts nothing. It simply continues. And in its persistence you find a strange kind of stillness, a quiet understanding that this is the shape of life now. Soft edges, blurred seasons, and the slow work of learning to endure what does not end. The rain eases into a thin drizzle by the time you step outside again, though the sky still hangs low and colourless, as if someone forgot to finish painting it. The air smells of wet earth, and the faint sourness of rot spreading quietly through the ground. You draw your cloak a little tighter, not to stay warm. Warmth has become more rumour than reality, but simply for the faint illusion of shielding yourself from a world that never really stops seeping in. The fields lie ahead in the same position they always have, waiting with the patience of something that has nothing left to offer. You move toward them out of habit, the way you might trace the same line in a book you've already memorized, not for meaning, but because your hand no longer knows where else to go. Each step sinks slightly, water rising around your boots in slow ripples that seem to take their time deciding where to go next. At the edge of your land, you pause. The soil there has changed quietly over the weeks, as though losing itself grain by grain, the structure dissolving into something soft and tired. You press your heel down and feel the ground give beneath you, gentle, yielding, too easily persuaded. It's the softness of something that no longer remembers its purpose like an unformed thought. It shifts without resisting, spreading outward rather than upward. You crouch down and scoop a handful of the earth. It clings to your fingers in heavy clumps, wetter than it should be, thicker than it once was. When you let it fall, it drops in slow, reluctant pieces, like something being released from a grip it barely maintained. You wipe your hands on your tunic, leaving dark smears that feel more like stains than dirt. Moving along the boundary of the field, you follow the faint outlines where rows once stood. They look almost decorative now, faint impressions of order in a place overtaken by water and time. The crops you planted earlier in the season sit half submerged, their stalks bending as though embarrassed to still be here. You bend down to inspect them, though you already know what you'll find. The leaves have lost their firmness. They sag translucent at the edges, veins darkened from too much moisture sinking in. When you lift one gently, it breaks with little resistance, collapsing back into the mud with a soft sigh. The roots underneath offer no fight either. They come away in your hand with a gentle tug, as though grateful for the excuse to let go. You turn them over and study them. They are swollen and pale, the colour of exhaustion, carrying the same defeated heaviness you see in people who have stopped arguing because there is nothing left worth defending. You stand again, letting your eyes travel across the waterlogged stretch. The silence here is different from the silence in the cottage. Inside, the quiet feels contained, a careful stillness held within crooked walls. Out here, the quiet expands without boundaries, blending with the rain, the distance, the slow decomposition of everything that once tried to grow. Even the wind seems reluctant to disturb it, moving only in faint, hesitant breaths. A few birds pick through the pooled water, their wings tucked close as they search for anything resembling life beneath the surface. They move with the calm efficiency of creatures long accustomed to disappointment. You watch them for a moment, wondering how they manage to look both determined and resigned at once. Perhaps that is the secret of survival now, accepting that effort seldom matches outcome, yet continuing with the motions all the same. You continue walking along the perimeter, your boots making soft sucking sounds with each lift, as though the earth is reluctant to release you. The puddles reflect a distorted version of you, elongated, blurred, as if the land itself is quietly erasing your outline. You move from one patch of standing water to another, inspecting what remains of the seedlings. Most have already succumbed to the constant wetness, leaning at odd angles or disappearing entirely beneath the murky surface. A few still cling upright, but their colour tells you everything. A dull, washed-out green that carries no promise. When you kneel again, the wetness seeps through your clothing. You barely react anymore. The boundary between dry and wet has thinned so much in your life that it barely registers. You brush aside the surface water and dig lightly with your fingers, tracing the soil's texture. Once it would crumble into coarse grains, warm from the sun. Now it breaks apart like soaked bread, collapsing into itself with no structure left to hold it. You exhale slowly, watching your breath mingle with the cool air. The thought crosses your mind that the soil is learning a new kind of stillness, the same way people learn to quiet themselves when hope becomes a luxury. The land isn't fighting, it's waiting. You can't tell if that patience brings comfort or dread. A faint sound draws your attention, a distant creak from a cart on the far road, its wheels struggling in similar conditions. You turn your head, but the figures moving along the road are too far to see clearly. They look small and slow, bent under whatever weight they carry. You know the pattern well. People walking with the steady pace. Of those who have nowhere to hurry to, the famine has a way of flattening urgency, teaching everyone the same measured steps. When they vanish from view, the landscape returns to its muted solitude. You run your hand along a fence post, feeling the soaked wood splinter slightly beneath your touch. Even the fences look thinner now, their lines wavering as if they too have grown tired of holding shape. Moss climbs the lower edges, feeding on the constant moisture with the determination crops no longer have. You continue walking until you reach the farthest corner of your land, where the drainage ditch overflows into a sluggish stream. The water there carries bits of leaves, stalk fragments, and loose soil drifting along like debris in a slow-moving thought. You crouch again and watch it pass, the current barely strong enough to classify as movement. The surface trembles under the light drizzle, creating tiny dimples that appear and disappear without significance. The smell here is stronger, dampness mixed with the early hints of rot, not enough to overwhelm, but enough to linger at the edge of awareness as you inhale it the way one inhales bureaucratic dust, unavoidable, unremarkable, yet unmistakably present. It's the scent of a year refusing to proceed as it should. Straightening up, you rest your hands on your lower back, feeling the slight ache that always seems to deepen on days like this. Your body is adjusting to the slower rhythm of hunger, conserving energy the way the land hoards water. The symmetry is uncomfortable, but undeniable. As you walk back toward the centre of the fields, you notice something subtle. The sound of the rain has changed. Not stopped, not lightened, just altered its texture. The way a scribe might change ink, but continue the same sentence. Instead of drumming, it now patters more softly, absorbed before it can properly land. The soil has grown so saturated that it no longer echoes anything. It simply receives endlessly. This realization settles into you, quiet and steady. The world around you is not collapsing all at once. It is dissolving slowly, ceremoniously, as though following a procedure written by someone who prefers details to drama. Nothing here screams, nothing here begs. Everything yields with the patience of something deeply tired. You make one more circuit around the fields, not to search for signs of improvement, but because movement feels better than standing still. Your footsteps trace a familiar pattern, creating small impressions that will fill with water by evening. You pause occasionally to touch a leaf, to test the firmness of a stalk, to lift a handful of earth as though you're asking it a question. It answers the same way each time, quietly, without explanation. When you finally turn back toward the cottage, the horizon blends with the low sky, forming one continuous wash of muted grey. You feel the weight of the scene settle on you, not as despair, but as a tired acknowledgement. The soil is losing itself. The crops have stopped performing the polite fiction of growth. The land is falling silent in slow, deliberate increments, and you're simply learning to move with it. You walk home with the steady steps of someone who has grown used to soft ground, soft light, and the slow undoing of things that once stood firm. The drizzle follows you, tracing the same rhythm across your shoulders that it traces across the fields, quiet, persistent, and in no hurry to stop. You return to the cottage with the same steady rhythm that now governs nearly every movement you make. The drizzle marks soft lines across your cloak, soaking it through, but even discomfort feels weakened by repetition. There is no sudden chill, no shiver of surprise, just the slow realization that the fabric has absorbed as much as it can and now transfers the cold straight into your skin, and you push the door open, step inside, and feel the familiar dimness settle over you like a blanket too thin to matter. The air indoors is still, carrying the faint smell of damp wood and last night's smoke. You move to the table without thinking, your hands already reaching for the small bowl you keep near the hearth. It's an automatic choreography, a set of motions learned more through necessity than practice. Your limbs behave like scribes tracing old instructions. Following habits that no longer require conscious thought, you kneel beside the storage bins and lift the lids slowly. The faint scrape echoes through the quiet room, exposing what little remains. A few handfuls of grain rest at the bottom, spread out like someone tried to make them appear more than they are. You study them for a moment, not with hope, not with disappointment, but with that neutral acceptance you've grown strangely accustomed to. There's a strange comfort in predictability, even when the predictability is sorrow. Your stomach tightens with a slow, hollow curl. It's not a sudden pang, but a long drawn-out presence. The kind that has become so familiar, it feels like someone standing just behind you. Hunger has changed shape in your life. It no longer arrives in waves or flares. It sits with you. It leans against your ribs. It follows you around as quietly as a shadow that has learned how to breathe. You take a small pinch of grain and let it fall into the bowl, then another, and another. Each motion is careful, deliberate, patient, almost ritualistic. You portion out meals that barely qualify as such, watching the bowl fill at a pace slower than thought. You have learned the art of stretching food the way one stretches an apology, thinning it out until almost nothing remains but the gesture. When you carry the bowl to the hearth, your hands do not tremble. That surprises you sometimes, though you never mention it aloud. You stir water into the grain and place the mixture near the fire, letting it warm slowly. The flames lick at the base of the pot, small and uncertain, as if afraid to consume too much, too quickly. You lean closer, holding your hands near the heat. The warmth creeps into your fingers with timid steps like a child unsure whether it's welcome. While the mixture softens, you sit in your usual place, on the low stool by the table. The room is quiet, except for the muted patter of rain outside and the occasional creak from the shrinking wood. Along the walls, you rest your elbows on your knees and let your gaze settle on the cracks in the floor. They look deeper today, though you know that may just be the dim light playing tricks on them. Still, the idea of the floor slowly opening up beneath you doesn't alarm you. If anything, it seems like something you would meet with a sigh. Your stomach murmurs again, less a complaint and more a reminder. A familiar voice, though voiceless. Hunger has become an intimate presence. It doesn't beg, it doesn't bargain. It simply waits, patient and persistent, the way the rain waits for the clouds to grow heavy enough. You've begun noticing its patterns, how it tightens in the mornings, loosens briefly after the thin meals, then settles into a long, dull pressure by evening, almost like a schedule, almost like companionship. You stir the mixture again, watching the grains swell just enough to resemble food if you don't look too closely. The scent is faint, barely more than steam, but it carries the suggestion of nourishment. You ladle the thickened mush into a wooden bowl, balancing it carefully as you carry it back to the table. The heat warms your palms in a way that feels almost luxurious, though the feeling fades quickly. You take a slow spoonful, because eating quickly brings no satisfaction. The taste is faint, watery, the grains soften to the point of lost identity. You chew anyway, because chewing makes time pass, and passing time has become its own small victory. Another spoonful follows, then another. You watch your hands as they move, Mechanical, steady, resigned. They behave as though someone is guiding them. Someone older, someone who has lived through this before and knows exactly how to survive by inches rather than miles. There's a strange comfort in the predictability of their movement. They do not ask questions. They do not falter. They simply comply. Outside, the rain grows heavier again, tapping a more insistent rhythm against the roof. You glance toward the window, where droplets race each other down the uneven glass. They move fast at first, then slow as the surface becomes crowded. It mirrors the way hunger behaves, quick to arrive, slower to leave, settling eventually into a constant presence. You set the bowl aside once it's empty, though the emptiness hardly feels different from the fullness. The hunger inside you doesn't recede, it simply shifts gears, changing the pressure, but not the presence. You press a hand against your abdomen, feeling the hollowness beneath your palm. There's no sharp ache, no violent craving, just a tired stretching, like a room that has been emptied of its furniture, but still expects someone to sit down. Your eyes wander around the cottage, tracing the lines of the walls, the sag of the ceiling, the small piles of tools leaning in corners. Everything looks slightly thinner than it should, as though the hunger has seeped into the wood, the stone, the objects themselves. Even the air feels diluted, as if it's been shared among too many people for too long. You step outside again, feeling the rain on your face like cool fingertips. The world beyond your door looks strangely swollen, the soil dark and glossy, the puddles larger than you remember them. You walk toward the edge of your land, your steps slow but steady. Every movement is made with the careful efficiency of someone who has learned to budget energy like currency. You pause by a shallow pool where rainwater has gathered in a wide, shimmering sheet. The reflection that looks back at you is pale, stretched, softened. Your face has lost some of its contours. Your cheeks have thinned. Even your eyes seem different. Darker, but not with intensity, more with depth, as though they've been pulled inward by the weight of constant calculation. You squat beside the water and touch its surface lightly. It ripples, distorting your reflection until it becomes unrecognizable. The distortion feels appropriate. Hunger changes not just the body, but the shape of your own sense of self. It teaches you to shrink your expectations, narrow your focus, simplify your needs. Standing again, you walk along the muddy path that cuts through the center of your land. Your boots sink deeper than they used to, but you lift them with a quiet patience. Every step is a reminder that the body still obeys, even when it complains. You place a hand on your stomach again, not out of pain, but habit. Hunger has a way of teaching gestures, small ones, almost affectionate, like touching the shoulder of someone who refuses to leave your side. By the time you return to the cottage, the sky is darkening into its familiar shade of early dusk, the kind that arrives hours before nightfall. You close the door behind you and sink onto the stool once more. The room feels larger now, though that may simply be the emptiness inside you projecting itself outward, expanding until it fills the space around you. Your hands rest in your lap, palms open. They look older in the dim light, rougher, thinner, more defined by what they no longer carry. You flex your fingers slowly, feeling the slight stiffness of fatigue. You know the feeling will be back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Not the sharp pangs of missed meals, but the slow accumulation of emptiness, the steady administrative recording of lack. Hunger has learned your rhythms. It knows when you wake, when you rest, when you pretend not to hear it. It sits beside you like an assistant, keeping track of your diminishing reserves. Nodding calmly as each number decreases. It does not argue, it does not threaten, it simply acknowledges you. Quietly, exactly, consistently. And in its own bleak way, that consistency feels almost like recognition. You cross the lane that bisects the village with the slow, measured steps you have come to favour. The path sits soft from endless rain. Each footfall is swallowed as if the earth is apologizing for taking more than it can give. Houses lean against each other like tired companions, their thatch dark and flat, their timber frames breathing faint sighs through joints softened by moisture. The whole settlement seems to inhabit a single, prolonged exhale. People move through the street in clipped motions now, gestures reduced to what is necessary. Where once mornings began with gossip and the loud exchange of news, voices have thinned into brief, efficient sounds. Nods are practiced, smiles have become economy-sized. You greet a neighbour with a lifted hand. He tilts his head in return, a motion so small it could be mistaken for wind. His eyes avoid yours with a precision that feels like training. Conversation has been trimmed to essentials, names, needs, times, then folded away with an embarrassed hand. You pass the smith's forge. The bellows hang idle, its leather slack and glossy with moisture. The blacksmith stands beneath the eaves, his arms crossed, watching the rain as though he expects it to give instructions. He nods at you and returns to his silence. Once you used to stop and listen to the rhythm of hammer on anvil and feel the comfort of things being remade. Now that sound feels like a disruption, implying possibilities you no longer permit yourself to imagine. Children, when they appear, do so in small, careful groups. They run with the minimal energy their bodies will allow, playing games that revolve around finding small treasures, a bit of string, a smooth pebble, a shard of pottery. Their laughter, when it surfaces, is thin and quick, as if the sound has been budgeted. You watch them and think about the way scarcity teaches restraint, how joy becomes a commodity measured in brief, precious moments. You notice doors left ajar where they once were closed with the tight, stubborn pride of householders confident in provisions. Now, open doors feel like invitations that no one expects to accept inside. Chairs sit pulled back at odd angles. Pots on hearths have been left to cool mid-stir. A spindle lies tangled on a table, a half-knit scarf abandoned in the act of creation. These things are not dramatic, they are procedural. They indicate that someone rose, did what needed doing, and then walked away, either to seek work or because their life had been quietly reorganized around fewer necessities. On a narrow side street, you pass a cottage with smoke trailing from its chimney in small sporadic puffs, the household making a feeble attempt at warmth. A child stands at the doorway, clutching a thin shawl around their shoulders. When you nod, the child returns the gesture with a solemn seriousness that makes your chest ache in the particular way that memory does, small and precise, a reminder of what used to anchor days. There is no outcry when mothers and fathers leave for other places. There is only a shrinking inward, a practical rearrangement of the village's social furniture. Graves multiply at the edge of the green, but not in the way of a cataclysmic collapse. They appear with the quiet efficiency of a clerk filing forms. Another small hollow, another wooden marker, another whispered line in a register that someone keeps, because keeping records is a modest way of denying chaos. The bell at the chapel rings sometimes, too often perhaps, and yet each toll has the tone of ritual more than drama. When the bell rings, villagers move through the streets in the same cadence, a brief pause, a bow of the head, a continuation. Even sorrow has become scheduled, a series of tasks to be conducted with as little waste as possible. You find the communal well and pause by its rim. The bucket feels heavier in your hand than it used to, laden not only with water, but with the accumulated small necessities of many lives. Women stand in a loose circle, exchanging brief lines. Who has seed to spare? Who can trade oats for a handful of salt? Who knows of work? Their speech is spare and exact, requests and answers measured like a ledger. The rhythm comforts you in its own way. There is a logic to this economy of words. You contribute what you can to the exchange, aware of how the calculations in each voice clip are performed with thrifted kindness. It is the kind of generosity that costs nothing but the willingness to look. A man who sells fish walks past with his basket nearly empty. He lifts his chin toward you and offers a half-hearted joke about the weather, a practiced attempt to reclaim something like normalcy. You supply a smile that is pre-measured and acceptable. Humour surfaces as a dry, tired slip, an acknowledgement of absurdity rather than a true escape. It lands quietly, and the two of you move on with a small, shared exhale. There are houses that still hold more of their occupants, rooms where the light seems steadier. You notice them as minor anomalies rather than signs of hope. The occupant of one such house, an older woman who used to spin flax in the mornings, now sits in a window with a basket in her lap. Her movements are slow but deliberate. She looks up as you pass and speaks without rising, a comment about the clouds, an observation of the rain's pattern. You reply in kind. Her voice carries the dry humour that surfaces sometimes when life's ironies become too routine to shock. She mentions in passing that she has started teaching the children to count days by the ring patterns in grain stalks. You both smile at the smallness of it. It is the kind of joke that recognises endurance rather than mockery. The Lord Steward moves through the village from time to time. When he arrives, there is a short, stiff ceremony, a nod here, a curt answer there. He keeps his distance, and the village keeps its polite attention. You have watched his visits become more like inspections than conversations. The exchange reduced to accounts and signatures. The steward's language is formal, procedural, an administrative tone that fits the larger mood. Everything recorded, everything categorised, nothing dramatised. Markets, once a place of bustle and barter, contract into a skeletal hour of trade. Stalls are spaced further apart, space left between them, as if attendees were measuring the risk of proximity goods that once gleamed with abundance, now show only their rough edges. The merchant with the spices has few customers. His jars seem oddly ornamental. You run your fingers over a sack of beans and feel the parchment thin beneath them. You buy only what is necessary, the act of purchase itself becoming an exercise in self-restraint that feels oddly respectful. By late afternoon, the village seems to fold inward like a page being turned. Windows darken, shutters close with a soft finality that is not theatrical but precise. People withdraw into their own rooms and routines as if conserving warmth as well as energy. The street lights, if they ever had proper names, fade into the background while the rain continues its quiet work. You return to your cottage and close the door gently behind you. The sound seals the day into a compartment. Inside, the hearth is a small, stubborn glow. You warm your hands by it and listen to the house settle. The village's shrinking is a process that moves not in violent bursts but in the steady reallocation of trust and attention. Conversations have shortened, not because there is nothing to say, but because words require the kind of energy that is now carefully budgeted. Nods and sighs are not failures of speech. They are adaptations. When you finally lie down, the creak of an empty house next door reminds you that departure can be an absence that still makes noise. The silence that follows is not empty. It is filled with the thin hum of living things adjusting to less. You breathe in and out. The village breathes with you, small and measured, each exhale a tiny, weary affirmation that tomorrow will come and will be met, again, with the same dignified economy of motion. In that shared quiet, you find a certain bleak companionship. The village shrinks, yes, but it does so with a kind of order that keeps its people recognisable to one another. They still exist in relation to each other. Neighbours, traders, the odd child who keeps count of the rain. The bonds have narrowed, but they have not vanished. They persist quietly, as if they were another necessary ration, to be conserved, used wisely, and occasionally, very carefully, replenished. You move toward the church as one moves toward a meeting that cannot be missed, not out of devotion so much as obligation. The path is familiar beneath your feet, soft from the rain, trodden into a narrow groove worn by many feet that have walked similar circuits of need and remembrance. The church sits where it always has, squat and unpretentious, its stone dark with the patient stain of moisture. From close up, the building smells of the things that persist in damp places, cold mortar, old wax, and the faint iron-tinged memory of the bells. The bell tower leans slightly, not enough to alarm, but enough to give the whole structure the tired attitude of something that is still trying. You can hear the bell before you see it, a slow, deliberate peal that travels across the village like a brief report. The sound is not mournful in the way fresh grief can be. It is administrative. It announces a fact the way a clerk would record a line in a ledger. Clear, exact, unemotional. That precision is what makes it so steady, and in its steadiness there is a peculiar consolation. Things are being counted, and acknowledged. Inside, the air is cooler and carries a stillness that feels almost like a document filed and closed. Moisture gathers in the corners, beading where the stones meet, and a faint draught creeps along the floor. The candlelight is small but persistent, the wax pooling in patient circles. You find your place on the worn bench and sit with the same collection of people you have learnt to expect. A few steadfast elders, some children hushed by habit, and faces that shift in number with the seasons of departure. The priest moves through his duties with the economy of someone who has learned to make gestures stretch. His voice is measured, low and steady, each word chosen with the care of a man who knows that language itself is becoming a scarce resource. He reads the names from a thin book, inked lines careful but faded, though sometimes the names repeat with an unsettling regularity. His prayers are not extravagant. They are practical petitions, small and exact, as if he too feels the need to ration the language of solace. You notice how the congregation has altered its rhythms, where once people would spill stories into the chapel that later spilled out into the fields. Tales of births, marriages and small triumphs. Now the talk is compressed into necessary exchanges. Who is sick? Who can take a shift? Who will watch a child? Conversation here has taken on the clarity of a ledger, entries and responses, no margins for embellishment. Even mourning has become procedural. The ritual of grief is performed with the same precise motions as any other village duty. Stand, bow, cross yourself, step forward, step back. Each action is a line practiced enough to avoid surprise. Funerals come often, not as dramatic events, but as a steady succession of small chores. You attend because attendance is itself a kind of economy, an allocation of time that affirms a community's continued investment in one another. The procession moves with a measured cadence, a few steps in front, a small coffin borne on tired shoulders, the bell tolling at intervals like a metronome. Faces in the procession are quiet, not because words are absent, but because words would be too expensive. Tears, when they appear, are discreet and controlled, spent as if from a shared ration. At the graveside, the act of lowering the body into the earth is conducted with a softness that resembles apologies more than ceremony. People place soil gently, a handful at a time, as though trying not to disturb whatever dignity remains. You find your hand moving in the same way, each handful a slow, deliberate motion. There is a dry sort of humour that sometimes slips through the solemnity. Someone will remark, half to themselves, that the rain does not care for graves and has opinions about everyone alike. It draws a small, brittle laugh, a release that vanishes quickly but is oddly necessary. Survival here occasionally answers sorrow with a tiny joke so that sadness does not monopolize the whole day. After the burial, the congregation returns to the church where a muted communion is offered. The bread is humble, the wine diluted, small rituals made smaller by necessity, But they are not empty. They sustain in the sense of keeping a fragile continuity. You accept a piece of bread as you have accepted most things lately. With gratitude measured by function, the priest's words at the altar are short and practical. He reminds the people of tasks that must be distributed, of watch rotations, of the meager stores that will be shared. The liturgy folds into local business until the two are nearly indistinguishable. There is paperwork of a different kind here as well. The church keeps lists, names recorded, dates entered, notes on who can assist with which duties. Someone in a back alcove keeps a log of those who have left the village and those who have arrived. Another notes the distribution of small aid parcels when they come from the manor, rare occurrences that are met with an almost ceremonial attention. The church, for all its spiritual work, has become a kind of municipal office where the community's small economies are accounted for. It is a bureaucratic mercy, quiet, organised, and inevitable. The bell rings again, and you feel the small familiar shiver in your chest. Each toll draws the village into the same careful choreography. People rise from their benches, exchange a few short sentences, schedules of who will fetch water, who will mend a roof, and then disperse with the same economy of motion they have practiced all day. Tasks are allocated with a dispassionate efficiency that feels almost compassionate in its refusal to allow panic. You linger a moment by a pillar, running a hand along the cold stone. The touch leaves your fingers slightly damp with the church's steady humidity. In that coolness there is a strange clarity. Loss here is not a sudden crack, but a slow, documented reduction. The church chronicles it in ink and bell tolls, converting personal absences into communal entries. That transformation offers a peculiar kind of protection. Naming a thing keeps it from entirely vanishing into rumour. Outside, the rain continues its unhurried work, punctuating the day with its exacting rhythm. As you step back into the lane, you notice small exchanges that feel almost like aftershocks of the service. An offer to carry a basket, a promise to watch a child during a neighbour's absence, the trading of a few kernels of grain for a scrap of cloth. These acts are not dramatic. They are administrative kindnesses, quiet adjustments that keep the village functioning. You walk home with the bell's resonance still lingering in the air, a sound that keeps count of the village's losses and holds them in a form everyone recognises. The tolling is neither accusatory nor consoling. It is simply a record, issued regularly and taken down dutifully by those who hear it. You place your hand over your heart, not as a prayer, but as a small reassurance, an answering touch to the ledger the bell has written across the day. When you reach your cottage, the hearth is faint but warm. You sit and let the aftertaste of the bread remain at the back of your throat, plain, slightly dry, and oddly grounding. Outside, the rain keeps its rhythm, the bell's memory folded into the water-laden air. In the quiet that follows, you attend to your small daily rituals, mending the edge of your cloak, smoothing the straw mattress, setting a bowl near the door for the night. The bell has done its work. It has marked time and recorded another small human account. Your own tasks, like the bell, are precise, repeated, and necessary. You do not sleep easily that night, not because sorrow is new, but because the mind of someone who has watched the bell tally lives tends to think in lists. You find yourself cataloguing names and faces, their slight peculiarities, the little debts and favours that tie them to the village. It is neither a torment nor a comfort exactly, merely the way you keep order in a world that otherwise threatens to blur into sameness. The bells will ring again. They will keep counting. You will keep answering, quietly and precisely, in the slow, exact rhythm the famine has taught you. After the bell draws its last measured note, and people fold the day's formalities back into their pockets, you drift toward the green, where the market used to be, loud enough to hurt the ears. Now the space feels like a room where furniture has been removed to make room for less. Stalls stand at awkward angles, their cloths drooping like tired faces. Wooden frames sag under the weight of damp and disuse. The air here carries an economy of smells: wet sackcloth, a faint tang of fish that speaks more of memory than of abundance, and the clean, paper-thin scent of dried herbs someone hopes will fetch a coin. You approach slowly, as if the market itself is a fragile thing that might break with too much expectation. Merchants lift their heads with the practiced politeness of those who have learned how little attention will be paid. They set out what they can: a shallow bowl of beans, a few roots scrubbed and a little too small, jars of pickled, anything that can be preserved. Some stalls display textiles that have faded from long exposure to damp air. The colours are modest now, the dyes worn down to their accounting numbers. You run a thumb across a scrap of cloth and feel its thinness, the way fabric learns to make itself acceptable by becoming less. Prices are short, precise statements. The merchant across from you names a sum, and you hear the number land like a small, well-placed coin. He repeats it as if to remind himself. 3 pence, 3 pence, 3 pence, an incantation that carries less hope than memory. His tone is barely audible under the rain's steady drum. You reply with a quieter figure, not by boast or bluff, but by calculation. You know how many meals that coin might still secure, or how many it will not. Barter has become a mathematics taught in private, a skill passed like a secret. Men with baskets move between stalls, eyebrows lowered in concentration. They trade a few kernels for a scrap of cured meat, the exchange carried out with a quick nod, as efficient as a clerk transferring entries between ledgers. Sometimes a favour is traded instead of coin. Watch my child for a morning, mend this strap, carry a sack to the granary. The market has folded small personal economies into its commerce. Relationships are now currency. You notice how people speak in phrases that sound almost rehearsed, short practical questions and responses that avoid the luxury of narrative. There is no small talk here. Words expend energy, and energy is rationed. Even gossip, once the village's lifeblood, has been condensed into functional updates. It is not that stories have vanished. They have simply been reformatted to fit the new margins. A vegetable seller lifts his chin and offers you an apology in the form of a turnip too small to be named. He shrugs with the wry acceptance of someone who has become intimate with scarcity. When you buy it, you both understand the transaction as more than trade. It is the quiet preservation of dignity. He refuses to give his best route away. Neither do you insist the bargain is a mutual agreement to continue behaving as though the world still holds protocols. The town crier, if anyone still carries that title, walks through with folded paper in hand. He reads aloud a few lines about rations arriving soon at the manor, his voice carrying the type of hope that is measured, and conservative people stiffen briefly at the news, then return to their measured routines. The announcement is met with the same kind of controlled optimism you have learned to practice. A small, careful intake of breath, a look shared between two neighbours, and then a return to bargaining. Hope here is distributed modestly so that it does not unbalance the daily ledger of survival. Children hover at the edges, clutching tokens of small value, a polished pebble, a scrap of ribbon. They watch the adults move like a lesson in efficiency. You find yourself watching them too, admiring how they make play from the smallest of materials, how they convert trivial things into narratives that do not cost much to maintain. Their laughter occasionally surfaces, shy and short-lived, and in those moments the market seems less like a place of loss and more like a place where human inventiveness holds its ground. A tinker with a cart of patched metal passes, offering to mend a pot or sharpen a blade for a barter of grain. His hands, clever and stained, move as if obeying a long-used pattern. You hand over a broken hinge you have kept for months. He examines it and nods, promising a repair by evening. The agreement is simple and practical. In another time, you might have insisted on new iron. Now you accept the necessity of mending. Repair becomes a craft of quiet optimism. You pass a stall where a woman sits stitching strips into rope. She talks to herself in a low voice, words that sound like counting and comforting at once. People stop to buy a length of rope for tying bundles or to ask about seeds which are now traded with hushed seriousness. Seed exchanges have become ceremonial, small packets labelled with dates and origin, a record of trust. If you take a seed, you must return part of your harvest the next season, if there is a next season. These agreements form the invisible scaffolding that keeps the community connected. There are also the occasional sellers of curios, things pulled from attics and chest corners, a faded doll, a cracked comb, a coin with a hole worn through its face. People look, touch, then often move on. Nostalgia exists here, but is shorn of indulgence. It is a kind of inventory that allows people to remember without losing power. A child runs after a ribbon tied to a stall, and for a heartbeat the market looks like itself again. Bright, noisy, full of small economies of pleasure. You notice the steward's shadow moving near the edge of the market, speaking quietly with a merchant about distribution lists and records. His presence is a reminder of the larger structures that still hum in the background. Manorial obligations, a ledger of dues and decrees. He speaks in terms of quotas and allotments. His language, the blunt instrument of administration. Villagers nod and answer with the same flat efficiency used in all civic interactions. Their responses are careful and precise. The steward does not linger. He is not here to console. He is here to record. As the afternoon moves toward evening, the market thins. People fold their goods with the mechanical calm of those who have practiced retreat stalls close. Tarps are tied, and the remaining traders exchange a few last soft comments about the weather and the price of barley. Even farewells are short. You gather your small purchases, a handful of roots, a scrap of cloth, a small length of rope, and tuck them carefully into your sack. Each item has been chosen to stretch as many uses as possible, each a small economy of utility. You walk home with the market smells clinging to your cloak, an after-image of other lives passing through this space. The lane is quieter now, the water slipping off leaves with small, regular sounds. Along the way, you pass a house where the light within is just beginning to flare. A family sits around their hearth. A pot simmers faintly. They nod as you pass, a ritual acknowledgement practiced in low energy. You return the nod with the same economy of motion. There is comfort in recognizing faces and in the tiny confirmations that the day's work has been done. Once inside your cottage, you lay the goods on the table and sort them with the methodical care of someone balancing an account. You set aside a seed or two, marking them with a crude scratch on the inside of the bowl. That small registry feels like an act of governance, a personal record that might outlast the day. You place the rope by the door, imagining the small repairs it will enable. The turnip you bought gets washed and sits near the fire, modest and promising in its own understated way. You eat slowly that evening, tasting the simple textures as if cataloguing them. Each bite is deliberate and measured, a continuation of the economy that started in the market and ends at your hearth. Outside, the rain continues its patient work, and the market lies quiet until another day. The market forgets what plenty looked like, not in a single break, but through the slow redefinition of what counts as sufficient. You, like everyone else, respond by learning to make modest things matter. In the dim light, you add the day's small accounts to the mental ledger you carry. Who traded what? Who said they could spare a handful of grain? Who needs a watch tonight? The market was not a place where grand decisions are made, but it is where daily survival is negotiated and kept honest. You close your eyes with the weight of its small transactions in your head. They are the kind of catalogues that steady a person, lists of things exchanged, favours promised, seeds saved. They are not dramatic, but they are necessary. And in their necessity, you find a kind of ordered comfort. Morning drifts into being with the same thin light that has accompanied every waking moment these past seasons. Grey, deliberate, a light that hesitates before fully arriving. You step outside into air that feels newly washed, yet indistinguishable from yesterday. The ground holds the softened imprint of the night's rain, and the path toward the manor appears as a wavering line, reshaped daily by boots that drag more than they lift. Your summons came quietly, passed from one tired mouth to another. The Lord's clerks are keeping records again. They want numbers, quantities, whatever remains. These visits have become part of the rhythm of life, as expected as the rain, as procedural as the tolling bell. You join the others walking in small groups, their edges worn smooth by the shared weight of giving account. The manor rises ahead, its stone darkened to the same colour as the sky. You feel no intimidation, only that slight heaviness of entering a place where decisions are made in terms that rarely acknowledge the bodies behind them. The courtyard smells of wet earth and horses, a scent that once might have evoked structure and discipline, but now carries something closer to resignation. The guards nod you through with the mild indifference of men who have lifted too many gates and seen too many faces crease with similar lines. Inside the great hall, the air feels cooler, almost medicinal. Long tables are arranged with a formality that seems faintly theatrical given the lack of abundance they oversee. At the far end, clerks sit poised with quills, each man handling his station with the same clipped efficiency. Their robes hang in muted folds, fabric slightly stiff from repeated drying. They shuffle sheets of parchment with gestures so smooth they seem to exist outside of fatigue. You take your place in line. It moves steadily, if slowly, each villager stepping forward, speaking softly, offering their portion of truth. When your turn comes, you approach the table with the small, instinctive bow that etiquette demands, neither deep nor reverent, simply correct. The clerk before you does not look up at first. His attention belongs to the parchment, the ink, the arithmetic that must be kept ordered. "Name?" he says with the neutrality of someone opening a ledger. You answer in the same tone. He scratches the syllables down, the quill's tip making a rasp you can almost feel along your teeth. He asks what livestock remain, and you list them, each number feeling oddly hollow as it leaves your mouth. When he asks about grain, your answer is short enough that you almost wince at how little sound it takes. He writes that down too, as if inscribing a moment of weather. He moves through categories with the precision of someone sorting seeds. Tools, harvests, debts, work owed, work completed. Each answer you give feels like a small surrender, though not one you resist. Resistance requires energy, and energy is now used differently, allocated with care, like water from a shallow well. You watch the way his hand moves, rising and falling in a tempo so practiced you wonder if his muscles have learned the motions independently of thought. Occasionally, he makes a mark that carries more weight, the quill pressing harder into the page. You can almost sense the indentation it leaves. These markings will determine the amount of tax that can be postponed, what ration might be offered, whether your household is considered at risk or simply reduced. The clerk's face reveals nothing. His expression is a quiet surface on which numbers settle like dust. If he sees how thin you've grown, he does not mention it. His work is to tally, not to interpret. Behind him, other clerks conduct the same ritual. A chorus of scratching quills fills the hall, a faint and steady sound, like insects working through dry leaves. Together they produce a kind of bureaucratic hum, official, indifferent, strangely comforting in its consistency. You realise that this sound has become part of the landscape of Famine. its presence as common as the creak of door hinges or the sighs of exhausted neighbours. When you pause to consider one of the clerk's questions, he waits without impatience. This is his duty, and he executes it with the discipline of someone long detached from the outcomes of his own calculations. You recognise that detachment as a kind of self-preservation. If he felt every loss he recorded, he would drown in a flood of numbers that mimic suffering too closely. So he listens, registers, and sets each fact down as neatly as a stone in a wall. You speak about the yield that failed, the patch of field that flooded beyond use, the grains spoiled by mould. Your voice has become accustomed to describing such things. The words are free of drama, because drama requires spare breath. The clerk writes without lifting his eyes. It is not that he does not care, it is that caring must be filed elsewhere. When he finishes noting your harvest, he closes the ledger halfway and scans your face with clinical assessment. It is the only moment in which he appears to see you as flesh rather than figures. His gaze travels once over your features, lingering where your cheekbones have sharpened, where your cloak hangs looser than last season. He does not write down these observations, but the slight purse of his lips tells you he has filed them mentally. You may be allocated a portion of barley, he says, his voice dry and steady. If the stores allow it, the conditional hangs in the air, formal, unadorned, familiar. You nod because questioning would alter nothing. The clerk nods back as though your acceptance completes some quiet equation between you. You step aside to allow the next villager forward. A woman muttering numbers under her breath lowers herself onto the stool. Her voice trembles slightly, the quiver of someone too tired to disguise nerves. You watch her hands clutch the edge of the table, knuckles pale. The clerk begins again. Name, livestock, grain, debts, losses, his tone identical to before. It feels like witnessing the same sentence spoken in different voices. You exit the hall and find yourself exhaling without meaning to. Outside, the courtyard feels brighter than it did when you entered, though the sky remains the same dull slate. People gather in small clumps, comparing notes quietly. No one demands sympathy. The village has learned how difficult sympathy is to carry when everyone requires it. Instead, people trade information: who received an allocation, who might borrow tools, who is too ill to work next week. It is the kind of mutual accounting that sustains in subtle ways. The steward stands near the well, speaking to a pair of guards. You observe his hands moving as he talks. Precise gestures, outlining boundaries, quantities, instructions. His voice carries that same administrative weight. The tone of someone enumerating tasks in a long chain of tasks. The famine seems to have turned even speech into a structured exercise. Heading back through the village, you become aware of how the record-taking shapes the day's movements. People shuffle home with the posture of those who have been evaluated, weighed quietly, and found lighter than expected. You feel it too, that faint administrative fatigue left behind when someone has converted your life into columns and categories. Along the path, a neighbour asks softly how your assessment went. You summarise it in a single line, and she nods with the understanding of someone who recognises the cost of elaboration. She mentions that her own tally was shorter than she expected. You reply with a small dry comment that mild surprises seem to be the only kind left. It earns a smile, thin but genuine, before you part ways. By the time you reach your cottage, the air carries the scent of damp straw and distant wood smoke. Inside, the space feels slightly altered, as though it has absorbed the day's accounting into its walls. You set your bundle down, sit on your stool, and rest your elbows on the table. Your body feels heavier, though not from burden, more from the subtle shift of realizing that your losses now exist in ink somewhere, formal and undeniable. You think about the clerks' faces, their unbroken calm, the dry rustle of parchment. You picture the lines they wrote. neat rows recording how much you have and how much you no longer do. The numbers feel strangely separate from you, like a shadow cast at the wrong angle. Yet they matter. They govern rations, taxes, obligations. They transform personal misfortune into something that can be tallied and redistributed. For a moment, you imagine the ledger lying open in the hall, your name recorded alongside your dwindling goods. The thought is neither comforting nor unsettling. It is simply factual. Hunger, loss, and survival have taken on a bureaucratic shape, documented in a manner that makes them feel almost orderly. You lean back, close your eyes, and let your breath settle. The clerk's quill scratches linger faintly in your memory, dry, efficient strokes that seem to carve the air itself. They echo the famine's shape, quiet, methodical, unavoidable. When your eyes finally open, the room appears as it always does, modest, dim, persistent. You rise to tend the fire. The day continues, one recorded loss at a time. The morning begins with a thin clarity, the sort that almost convinces you the day intends something different. Lighter clouds, a faint promise of dry air. It's enough to make you consider movement, real movement, the kind that pushes your feet further than the boundary of fields and habit. You gather a small bundle, nothing extravagant, a crust wrapped in cloth, a strip of rope. The idea, more than the expectation, that somewhere beyond the familiar edges lies a variation of survival. The village sits quiet as you pass through it, the way a ledger lies quiet before someone opens it. Doors half open, half closed, never entirely committing. Smoke rises from chimneys in thin lines, as if trying not to call attention to itself. A few neighbours acknowledge you with small gestures, the kind that neither encourage nor discourage. They understand what you are doing, because they have done it, or thought about doing it, or will think about it again. The road stretches ahead in a pale ribbon of mud, braided with cart tracks and the shallow prints of feet that left before dawn. You walk with a pace that tries not to think too far ahead, each step matching the softened beat of your breath. The earth gives slightly under you, offering no resistance but also no reassurance. The air tastes clean, almost sharp, but it carries nothing fragrant, just the faint mineral tinge of places emptied of harvest. Hedges line parts of the road, their branches heavy with water, their leaves dulled. Occasionally a bird startles out, wings beating in a brief, surprised flurry before settling again somewhere unseen. You pause at such moments, letting the quiet fold back around you. Movement feels like punctuation in a sentence that is mostly silence. The first village appears after a long, slow stretch of road, its contours familiar in the way all small settlements resemble the bones of your own. Thatched roofs, sloping under the weight of soggy straw, walls leaning in the direction the wind prefers, livestock penned with fences that look tired of the responsibility. You enter without ceremony. Faces meet yours with cautious recognition, not of identity, but of condition. Their eyes have the subdued sheen of people who ration not just food, but expression. A man repairing a wheel looks up with the blank neutrality of someone who has assessed a situation before it arrives. Another traveller, another hunger, another shared shortage. You nod, and so does he, the exchange completing its cycle without requiring further expenditure. You pass a market space that resembles your own, though smaller. A woman arranges herbs on a cloth, but the bundles are little more than stalks. She offers you one, with the polite reflex that trading has taught her, though she expects nothing in return. When you decline gently, she accepts it without disappointment. Expectation here has been pared down to a line that barely registers. You ask, softly, whether work can be found. Her response is a quiet shake of the head, the movement economical, familiar. No flourishes, no elaborate excuses, just the truth, offered in a form that uses as little energy as possible. You thank her and move on. Beyond the village, the road narrows. Grass pushes through the centre, wet blades bending under the brush of your boots. You keep walking, partly out of determination, partly because stopping feels too much like conceding to the predictable. The countryside hums with a restrained stillness. The fields lie in sullen flats, and the distant hills appear bleached of contour. The second village sits further east, marked by a scattering of houses that slope inward as if huddled against a shared thought. You enter with the same careful pace, aware that strangers represent need more often than exchange. A group of men sits under an awning, debating something in low tones. When they see you, the conversation collapses into a straight line of observation. "Just passing, you say?" They nod. One gestures toward the centre of the settlement. "Nothing here," he replies, the statement precise enough to serve as a conclusion. You sense no hostility, only a practical desire to economise on misunderstanding. A young boy tugs at a rope tied around a goat that appears more bone than animal. The child meets your gaze, curious but careful, the way children in such times learn early to assess without engaging. You offer him a faint smile, and he returns a smaller one, more reflex than feeling. You ask again about work, about grain stores, about anything that might justify the distance you've walked. The answers come in a sequence of small headshakes and brief murmurs. A woman tells you the mill has been idle for weeks. A carpenter mentions losing half his timber to rot. A shepherd explains that his flock scattered during the last storm, many not returning. There is no malice in the refusals, just a mutual recognition that opportunity has become an imported concept, brought in stories rather than wagons. You take a seat on a low stone wall and watch the village breathe its slow, shallow breaths. The houses creak in familiar rhythms. The dirt path holds the imprints of many such searches. You realise, after a while, that no one asks what you're seeking. They do not need to. Hunger, shirk, better luck, the distinctions have become thin. When you rise, you feel the weight in your feet, not pain exactly, but the heaviness of ground that never quite lets go. You thank the villagers for their time in the same tone they used to decline you. Respectful, reserved, unembellished. The rest of the road is quieter. You pass fields that were abandoned mid-tilling, ridges collapsing in slow folds. A broken cart lies at an angle near a ditch, its wheels half submerged in mud. The sky lowers as afternoon stretches toward evening, the light diffusing into a soft grey that brushes the landscape with a uniform shade. You walk until the thought of walking grows thinner, unravelling from effort into resignation. By the time you see the outline of your own village again, the weariness in your limbs feels almost administrative, an entry in a logbook you've contributed to without question. The cottages appear exactly as you left them, neither improved nor worsened, simply frozen in the same subtle decline. A chicken pecks half-heartedly near a doorstep. A neighbour pauses when you pass him, his eyes reading your posture more clearly than any words you could offer. "Nothing?" he asks, though it functions less as a question and more as a confirmation. "Nothing," you answer. He nods once, then you nod back. The conversation ends there, its completeness requiring nothing further. You return to your cottage with the same steps you used when leaving, slow, steady, accepting. Inside, the dimness welcomes you like a familiar draft. You set down your bundle, unwrapping it with a care that borders on ceremony. The crust remains intact, untouched, your appetite retreated during the walk, replaced by the quiet clarity that fatigue provides. You place it on the table for later. Sitting on the stool, you stretch your legs out and study your boots. Mud clings to their seams in a thin, unwavering line. You run a finger across the hardened edge and feel how firmly the road has attached itself to you. The journey has not changed your circumstances, but it has altered your sense of distance. The land does not vary enough to reward motion. The thought settles with a muted finality. The famine is not a local condition. It stretches across fields and hedgerows, across villages that share your quiet calculations. The roads do not carry solutions, only confirmations. Walking them provides the illusion of choice, but the end is always the same. Thin faces, thin fields, thin prospects. You lean back, letting the small sounds of evening assemble around you. The drip from the roof edge, the soft rustle of the wind against the door, the settling sigh of the hearth's last embers. The room feels neither comforting nor cruel. It simply receives you, the way the land received your footsteps. The roads lead outward, yes, but they return you to the same place, a small cottage, a quiet village, a life contracted into careful measures. Distance, you understand, changes nothing except how tired your feet feel. Days drift together under a sky that rarely shifts from its dull grey certainty. You wake one morning without checking the light and realise it wouldn't matter if you did. The sky has settled into a uniform colour that feels less like weather and more like a decision, an administrative ruling passed down by clouds that no longer bother to move. You rise from your straw mattress, hearing the faint squish that accompanies even dry mornings now. Moisture has worked its way into everything, patient and thorough. When you push open the door, the air that greets you is neither cold nor warm, just wet, as if the world has become a sponge that someone forgot to wring out. You stand a moment, letting the damp settle over you. Your cloak hangs heavily across your shoulders, the fabric sagging with absorbed rain that never fully dries. You run your fingers through your hair. It clings together in thin strands, refusing to distinguish itself from the morning drizzle. The sensation no longer surprises you. Dampness has become a kind of shadow, following you with the same persistence as hunger. A few villagers pass you on the path, their movements softened by layers of wet cloth. They look like people wrapped in the same diluted thought, faces pale, hair plastered, steps careful on ground that gives way with the slightest pressure. One nods at you, and you return a gesture small enough to conserve warmth. Speaking feels unnecessary. The silence between you carries more weight than words. Out in the fields, the rain has shaped the land into something unrecognizable. Water sits in shallow pools across the soil, reflecting a sky so grey it looks like metal that forgot to shine. You kneel near one of the furrows and press your palm to the earth. It feels cool, swollen, and faintly trembling, as if it too has grown tired of holding so much of everything. Your fingertips come away coated in fine, soupy mud that dries into a thin film only moments later. You wipe them absently against your cloak, adding another layer to the accumulating damp. The crops, or what remains of them, stand half immersed in water that smells faintly of rot. Leaves sag under droplets that never seem to fall off. They balance there, like punctuation marks, waiting for an end that doesn't come. You touch a stalk lightly. It bends without resistance, the motion slow and resigned. There is no anger in it, just a leaf following the rules of decay with professional courtesy. When you straighten, a faint mist hangs across the field's edge, the kind that blurs outlines and makes everything appear to be dissolving at the edges. You watch a distant cottage fade in and out of the haze, as if the landscape itself is revising the world, erasing details and redrawing them with a dull quill so even sound behaves differently. The rain swallows small noises. Footsteps vanish into the softened ground. Voices lose their definitions, and only the steady patter against roofs remains consistent, a quiet bureaucracy of watermarking each passing hour. The sun, when you try to remember it, feels like a story you once heard from someone who exaggerated. You picture its warmth, but the memory flickers uncertainly, as if the image has faded from being handled too many times. You find yourself doubting whether the world ever held so much light. Your mind tries to reconstruct it, the way it felt on your back, the brightness that once cast shadows. But every attempt ends in a washed-out silhouette, an outline without substance. You stand there, eyes half closed, and cannot be entirely sure if the sun you imagine is something you witnessed or something you invented during a simpler season. Walking through the village, you notice how the rain has become a constant presence in every gesture. People wring out sleeves with practiced movements. They tip buckets automatically to empty the overnight accumulation. Those with livestock spend more time drying hooves than feeding. Even the dogs seem resigned, shaking themselves without urgency and then settling again in the same damp patches. The rhythm of life has aligned itself with the weather, as if human routines have been rewritten in the language of water. The carpenter's bench stands beneath a sagging awning, tools laid out with a kind of stubborn optimism. He works slowly, wiping each piece of wood before he cuts it, knowing the moisture will return the moment he lowers his gaze. You stop for a moment to watch him, noticing how his hands move with mechanical patience. He nods to acknowledge you, a small gesture weighted by the heaviness of the air. Further down the lane, a mother lifts her child's hood with carefully measured effort, securing it with a knot she checks twice. The child looks at you with wide, attentive eyes, as if studying how adults manage to endure the same endless dampness. You give a faint smile, just enough to be polite, not enough to disturb the stillness of the day. The child returns a small nod, solemn and thoughtful, then walks on. The roads leaving the village are no longer paths so much as elongated puddles. You walk along one, the ground giving way beneath you. As if sliding aside out of courtesy, water gathers in the grooves left by wagon wheels, forming mirror-like patches that break under your steps. Occasionally, you catch your reflection. Blurred, elongated, half-dissolved by ripples, you barely recognize yourself in these shifting outlines, though you cannot say what seems unfamiliar. The hollow of your cheeks, the curve of your posture, or the simple fact that the water distorts everything beyond certainty. Along one stretch of road, you pause at a small brook that has overstepped its banks. The water moves lazily, thick with silt. A floating branch catches on a stone, hesitates, then slides free with a faint sighing motion. You watch it drift, following its slow progress, as though it holds a message about persistence. You're almost too tired to decode. Returning home feels less like retreat and more like rounding out a necessary circuit. The door creaks softly as you push it open. Inside, the cottage carries the scent of damp wood. Woven tightly into the straw and the cloth, you set your cloak near the hearth, though you know it will never fully dry. The room is dim, but the dimness feels consistent, like a signature across everything you now inhabit. You sit for a moment on the stool, letting your hands rest on your knees. Your clothes cling to your skin in a second layer that is neither warm nor uncomfortable, just present. You've grown accustomed to this sensation, as if dampness has become the default state of your body. Even your thoughts feel moistened, softened at the edges. They drift through your mind with the slow, lazy trajectory of rainwater filling grooves in the earth. Outside, the rain maintains its steady rhythm, unbroken by wind or variation. It is so constant that you have stopped noticing each drop individually. The sound has blurred into a single continuous murmur, like ink flowing across parchment without pause. You find your breathing matching it, exhaling in quiet, rhythmic intervals. For a moment, you try to imagine what it would be like to wake into sunlight again, how it might pierce the window, how warmth might spread across your hands, but the thought bends under its own improbability, folding inward until it becomes almost abstract. Light has become a concept, not an expectation. A quiet knock sounds at your door. When you open it, a neighbour stands under the drizzle, offering a jar of thin broth. You accept it with gratitude, measured not by cheer, but by practicality. The two of you exchange a few short words about the next watch, about the animals, about the possibility of a break in the weather. Each sentence feels like a small, functional piece of community fitted into place. Then the neighbour steps back into the rain, absorbed almost immediately by the surrounding grey. You return to your hearth, warming your hands around the jar. The steam rises faintly, turning to moisture again before reaching the ceiling. You sip the broth slowly, its warmth spreading through you like a footnote, brief, important but without flourish. Outside, the rain continues its governance over the world, a steady, patient authority that no one challenges. You set the jar aside and listen. The rain no longer feels like an interruption or an event. It feels like an entire season, self-contained, endless, procedural. You sit back, close your eyes, and let the sound fill the space between thoughts. The damp settles around you gently, like a hand placed on your shoulder in quiet recognition. You breathe in the humid air, and the world seems to sigh around you. The rain has become its own calendar, its own language, its own kind of time. You carry it the way you carry everything now, slowly, steadily, like a second skin. As evening settles its grey hand over the village, the hearth becomes the centre of small economies again, not of coin, but of warmth and attention. You step inside the cottage where the fire glows like a modest, stubborn truth. The room smells of smoke and slowed stew, the kind of simple perfume that gathers when people spend long hours close to one another for practical reasons. You sit on your usual stool, close enough to feel the heat, but far enough to keep your cloak from smoking. Around you, a few neighbours arrive one by one, each movement careful and habitual, as if they had rehearsed the evening's choreography in the daytime to save strength. No one announces themselves with fanfare. Doors open, a foot crosses the threshold, and a chair creaks just so. The filling of a space is silent and precise. You fold your hands in your lap and listen to these small noises, the settling of a basket, the scrape of a wooden bowl, the soft sigh when someone relinquishes, standing for sitting. The absence of clamour has an almost ceremonial quality. Conversation here is measured because the mind in this season has decided to conserve its luxuries. People speak slower now, not because thought has dulled, but because words have become fragile. Each sentence is stretched deliberately, as if one could make hope last longer by speaking it in a lengthened, beautiful way. Her neighbour tells a story and draws out the names, that each syllable might linger and soften the edge of memory. The cadence resembles accounting, one detail entered, then another, until the story forms the neat columns of a life once lived with more fullness. You notice that the topics chosen are small and exact, stories of a particular harvest before the bad years, the peculiar way a certain cow liked to sleep, the time the miller danced awkwardly after a wedding. These are not grand histories, they are precise fragments, curated to be both believable and sustaining. Each recollection functions like a small ration, enough to keep a hunger at bay, but never so much as to provoke longing that cannot be answered. An older woman, who has traded work for stories as long as she has traded flax for cloth, begins to speak in a voice practiced to the point of softness. She recalls an autumn when apples were so abundant that children used them as substitutes for toys. You listen as she describes the sound of apples dropping into a cart, the way the skins would glint in sunlight, an image that now feels faint and imported, as though plucked from a different climate. People lean forward, not to argue or correct, but to accept the picture as a kind of fuel for the night. Another man speaks of a long-ago festival when the village gathered to light torches and the church bells were used for celebration rather than for ledgered notices. He shapes his memory with the same careful hand everyone uses now, mindful of not spending too much emotion on a single moment. There is a dry humour in how he concludes. We believed then that a bell could change a year. Now we know a bell mostly keeps accounting. A small laugh ripples through the room, brief, brittle, and precisely timed. The sound does not shatter the air, it just tessellates into it, like a tile placed neatly between others. Stories here are rarely about heroes. They are procedural accounts, how a fence was mended, how salt was saved for a wedding, how an old dog found a place in the warmest corner of the kitchen. They dwell on details that have immediate application. The narrator's craftsmanship lies in extracting tenderness from the ordinary without allowing it to become dangerous. Danger, in this economy, is the temptation to imagine abundance where none exists. You find yourself contributing, though your offering is small and practiced. You recall the taste of a loaf baked so well that its crust snapped like the back of a small twig. The way steam would unfurl when the loaf was split, you speak the memory softly, watching for how it lands. Someone nods, another inhales as if breathing in the remembered scent. No one demands extravagance. A fragment suffices. Your memory is accepted and filed away gently by others like a useful tool. Sometimes, stories carry advice disguised as reminiscence. A woman recounts how, in a season that was merely difficult, they would test seeds by looking at them in the light. If a bean appeared dull, they would not waste the furrow. She delivers the anecdote with the same dry precision you have come to expect, and you note the practicality of memory. It teaches without preaching. The advice is absorbed like grain sifted through fingers, a small saving for a later need. Children, when present, listen with solemnity that is almost comical. They widen their eyes at talk of games that lasted a whole afternoon, at tales of long ropes used for tugging contests, and at the commodity of spare flour. The adults watch the children watch the stories, measuring how much to expose. There is an unspoken agreement to protect their imaginings. Children deserve a little room to believe in more than rations. Occasionally, a child will add a flourish, a detail of imagined dragons or a made-up festival, and the adults will smile in a way that signals permission to keep some things light. You notice that people also tell small, dark jokes that slip through the gloom, like a thin candle. A man whose wife has gone to the manor for a list of rations quips that she will return with so little that even the cat will require a receipt. The room hums with a cautious amusement. Humour here is a tool, sharp when necessary, but it must be wielded with care, so as not to score deeper wounds. The exchange of stories does not demand equal time. Some nights one person will speak at length, pouring out a sequence of carefully tended memories, while others listen with the quiet gratitude of those who receive a gift. On other nights, the stories fragment into shared phrases, snippets that echo off the stone walls and settle like dust. The hearth's light makes everyone's faces soft and close. The shadows it casts are small and domestic, not dramatic. There is no need for grand gestures. Intimacy is managed in allotted increments. You also hear practical reports turned into narratives. A man offers an account of walking to a distant farm and finding the tracks of wolves, actual loss converted to story form, so the community can understand its contours. He speaks plainly about which barns appear vulnerable and which fences may yet hold. The story functions as both warning and plan. It is a way to distribute knowledge without creating panic. You memorize the details because memory is another kind of commodity, one that costs nothing to store but can avert future hardship. As the night deepens, someone begins listing small rituals that used to structure the year. Planting by moonlight, the method of curing turnips, the sequence of songs women sang when weaving. The litany of minor practices comforts, because it suggests that habit and craft are resilient. They may be adapted, stretched, or made smaller, yet they hold a continuity that pure survival does not. You like the way these rituals act as a bridge. They do not promise rescue, but they provide continuity that keeps identity intact. When conversation pauses, silence arrives like a settled verdict, soft and accepting. You sit with your hands folded and feel the slow rise and fall of your neighbour's breathing. In the hush, the hearth seems larger. The flame's small gestures become a chorus of quiet assurance. You breathe in the scent of smoke and shared stories, and in that inhalation, feel steadied. The accumulation of small recollections has done its work tonight. They have not banished hunger or restitched the fields, but they have held the village upright for another evening. Before you part for the night, someone tells one final, tiny tale, a recollection of a marginally better day, so precise it feels almost like instruction. A woman's method for simmering thin broth with an extra bloom of flavour using a scrap of herb. It is practical, modest, and immediately useful. You tuck the tip into your routine like a seed set aside for planting. You rise slowly, feeling the old tug of fatigue. People disperse quietly, their steps measured and economical as always. The fire's light recedes behind you as you close the door. Outside, the night presses its damp hand against the windows, but inside your chest there is a soft, ordered warmth, the result of shared memory and small stories that, in their careful rationing, keep you functional and human. You walk toward your bed with a mind full of tiny accounts, flavours remembered, instructions retained, jokes catalogued. These are modest reserves, but reserves nonetheless. They will serve you in ways coin cannot, by preserving a way of being that the famine cannot entirely consume. Morning comes in the same muted shade it has worn for months, the sky offering a light so thin it feels more imagined than given. You sit on the edge of the straw mattress, hands resting on your knees, waiting for your body to decide whether standing is reasonable. Breath moves through you in slow, uneven waves, as if it too must negotiate its passage. When you finally rise, the motion comes with the quiet disapproval of muscles that once obeyed without commentary. Your limbs feel as though they belong to someone much older, someone who has carried too many seasons without setting any down. You move anyway, because stillness does not feed you. The cottage greets you with its familiar coolness, the floor holding last night's chill, the air carrying a faint dampness that has woven itself into the walls. You gather your cloak and step outside, feeling the gentle pull of gravity in every joint. The morning air tastes clean but thin, carrying no hint of nourishment. You take a step, then another, each one measured as though your legs are doing careful arithmetic before committing to the next. Along the path, the village stretches itself awake with slow, reluctant movements. A few neighbours shuffle toward their chores, their bodies mirroring your own in their subdued effort. Someone bends to lift a pail and pauses halfway, deciding it is better to rest the handle against the ground for a moment before trying again. Another sits on a low step, elbows on knees, gathering the resolve to stand. These gestures have become part of the village's shared language, silent acknowledgements exchanged between people who understand how much strength costs. Now, you make your way toward the field with the same patient pace you've adopted in recent weeks. The ground is soft beneath your boots, the mud giving way easily, as if it sympathizes with your hesitation. A faint wind brushes past your face, carrying no distinct scent, neither foul nor pleasant. It feels impartial, like a clerk who is long tired of delivering either good or bad news. You breathe it in slowly, letting the air settle somewhere deep, where your ribs expand only as much as they must. At the edge of the field, you pause to steady yourself. The simple act of walking has left your legs trembling faintly, a quiet pulse that travels through your bones. You recognize this sensation. It has been building quietly, a gradual erosion rather than a sudden decline. Weakness arrives not like an intruder, but like an old acquaintance, returning without invitation. It settles in with polite persistence, taking a corner of your strength, then another, until the room you once had inside yourself grows smaller. Still, you kneel to inspect the soil. The motion is slow, careful. Your hands sink into the damp earth, the coolness a brief comfort against your palms. The field reveals its familiar story: waterlogged ridges, collapsed furrows, what remains of plants softened to the point of surrender. You touch a leaf and it tears with barely any pressure. You lift a small clump of soil and it slides through your fingers as though exhausted from holding itself together. Standing again requires thought. You brace one hand against your knee, pushing upward with the deliberation of someone solving a puzzle. When you finally reach your feet, your body sends a quiet signal of protest. Not pain, not alarm, but a simple acknowledgement that such movements now have a cost. You wipe your hands against your cloak and take another slow breath, noticing how your chest rises only halfway before deciding that is enough. The village feels smaller as you walk back toward it, not because the distance has changed, but because the space inside your body has. Weakness compresses the world, tasks grow further apart, steps grow longer. Even the air around you seems heavier now, as if it has learned to sit closer to the ground. A neighbour waves from across the lane, the gesture barely more than a lift of fingers. You raise your hand in return, though the movement tugs at your shoulder more than it should. When he approaches, his gait is uneven, his breath shallow. He mentions needing help, moving a sack of grain the manor distributed last week, a small burlap bundle that once would have been light work for either of you. Now it stands in his cottage like a modest hill. Neither of you is sure you want to climb. You follow him inside. Together you grip the edges of the sack, lift with careful coordination, and move it a short distance to a shelf. The effort leaves you both standing silently for several breaths, hands on hips, chests rising and falling in a slow staccato rhythm. He offers a faint smile, an acknowledgement of labour completed. You offer one back, the corners of your mouth pulling just enough to register sincerity. Stepping outside again, you feel the fatigue settling deeper, not sharply, but with a slow, procedural inevitability. You decide to rest on a wooden bench near the well. The seat is damp, but comfort now is measured differently. You sit with your elbows on your knees, your head bowed slightly, letting the minutes pass without trying to fill them. A child wanders by, glancing at you with the curiosity of someone who instinctively understands the shape of adult exhaustion, but cannot yet name it. You give the child a gentle nod. They return it before moving on. Your breath feels thin like fabric, or nearly to transparency. You catch it in small increments, each inhale gathered carefully, as though you are collecting something fragile. It reminds you of picking through the last grains in a sack, lifting only as much as you can hold without spilling. Your body has learned new ways to say, "Not today," subtle refusals you notice in the stiffness of your fingers, the heaviness along your spine, the way your knees choose angles that require less bending. When you rise again, the movement startles you with its effort. Your legs resist, not dramatically, but firmly. You place a hand on the bench to steady yourself, feeling the moisture cling to your palm. Standing upright takes longer than it should. You breathe once, twice, letting the air make its slow ascent through your lungs before you begin walking again. The sun has tried briefly to push through the clouds, but the attempt is half-hearted. Light spreads in a muted wash, giving the illusion of brightness without providing any warmth. You walk toward your cottage, watching how the dim glow touches rooftops without managing to illuminate them. The world feels pale and softened, as though sight itself has been thinned by hunger. Inside, you sink onto your stool and rest your head against the wall. The wood is cool, and the support feels necessary. Your limbs hang loosely, drained by a combination of hunger and the simple burden of being upright as you close your eyes and let your thoughts drift in and out. Not dreams, not plans, just the quiet hum of a mind too tired to push further. You catch yourself counting breaths, not to calm yourself, but to measure your capacity. 4 slow breaths, then a pause, 5 more. The rhythm is gentle, almost involuntary. It reassures you that your body still participates in the day, even if reluctantly. The sound of rain begins again, faint but steady, tapping at the roof with the persistence of a clock marking time. You listen without irritation. The sound has become part of the landscape, of your endurance. Weakness, too, is part of the landscape now. Another quiet force you negotiate with, the way you negotiate with hunger, or the state of the fields, or the clerk's ledger. You sit like that for a long while, letting moments stretch. There is no urgency anymore, only the simple recognition that everything must be paced, that your limbs now move slower, that your breath gathers itself carefully, that your strength arrives in smaller portions. You do not resent this. Resentment costs energy. Eventually, when the light grows dim enough to signal evening, you gather yourself with the patience of someone assembling worn tools. You rise, steady yourself, and prepare a small meal. Your hands move through the motions without haste, guided by the quiet understanding that nothing in this season is done quickly. You eat slowly, letting each bite settle before taking another. When you lie down later, the heaviness in your limbs is not just fatigue, it is an occupation, a presence that has entered without knocking. It settles across you like a second blanket, thin but undeniable. You breathe beneath it calmly, as though sharing the space is a kind of agreement. In time, your eyes close, the day's weight spreads itself evenly across your body, and you accept it with the same quiet compliance you have granted everything else the famine has delivered. The weakness that has come into your life is not a visitor. It is a resident, and you live alongside it, patient and slow, learning how to move in a world where strength is now something saved, not spent. The weakness clings to you through the morning, but you rise anyway, pacing your breath and movement as though each step must be negotiated. The cottage feels smaller today, its corners softened by exhaustion and the slow, drifting haze of hunger. You sit for a moment at the table, fingers resting on its worn surface, feeling the faint tackiness of moisture in the grain of the wood. The fire has gone cold, the air smells faintly of stale smoke and the wet earth that slides under the door each time the wind shifts. Outside, the village seems to be moving through its tasks with the same muted coordination as ever. People emerging, voices low, gestures small and practical. You step into the lane, steadying yourself with a hand on the doorframe, and begin the slow work of your day. Weakness shadows your movements, like a companion you never invited but must tolerate. It's lighter now, but only because your body has accepted it as part of its rhythm. You walk toward the small communal shed where the villagers keep tools and supplies too scarce to be owned individually. The ground squishes under your boots, absorbing your steps with weary familiarity. Someone is already inside, a neighbour sorting through items that once seemed trivial. A cracked jug, a frayed rope, a half-filled sack of beans. They glance up when you enter, giving you the tired, measured nod that people reserve for moments, requiring neither greeting nor explanation. You trade a few words, short, functional, before kneeling beside a small pile of old iron scraps. You sift through them, looking for a piece that might be shaped into a hinge or a hook. Your hands move without enthusiasm, guided simply by the need to replace the broken latch on your cottage door. You find a bent strip of metal that might serve and hold it up with a faint sigh that passes for validation. The neighbour offers you a thin smile and asks what you can trade. The question is asked gently, without judgment, but it still settles with an uncomfortable weight. You think for a moment. There isn't much left. A length of thread, a chipped bowl, a handful of barley you can scarcely afford to spare. You decide on the thread. It used to be valuable to you. Good thread always is. But the storm-damaged door makes sleep difficult, and sleep has become a kind of currency itself. You hand over the thread with a quiet practicality. It feels strange to let it go, yet the decision seems rational in the limited way choices make sense during famine. The neighbour accepts it with a nod, tucking it away with care. No flourish, no gratitude, just the completion of a transaction both of you understand for what it is: survival, reshaping, value. Outside the shed, the air is cool enough to draw a deeper breath from you. You walk back toward the village centre, the scrap of metal heavy in your hand. On the way, you pass the well. A woman stands there, struggling with a bucket that refuses to rise smoothly. When you offer help, she hesitates only a moment before stepping aside. Together you pull the rope, each of you using half strength that combined feels barely enough. When the bucket reaches the lip, both of you pause to steady your breaths. She thanks you quietly, offering a piece of stale bread in return. It is more than she can spare, and you know it, but refusing the gift would disturb the balance of the gesture. In famine, gratitude becomes a shared ration. You accept the bread, already planning to make it last longer than reason suggests it should. She takes the water home, and you watch the slow sway of the bucket as she goes. Walking again, you pass the blacksmith's small workspace. He's hammering a thin piece of metal into shape, his motions slow but exact. Tools hang on the wall behind him, many of them broken, some patched together in ways that would have made a craftsman wince in better years. Now they seem resourceful. You step closer and hold out your scrap. He looks at it, considers its potential, and gives a slight nod. "It'll do," he murmurs, voice like gravel that has learned patience. You ask what he wants for the work. He pauses, then shrugs in a way that suggests the list of acceptable trades grows shorter by the day. "A handful of dried herbs, if you have any," he says, though it sounds more like a suggestion than a demand. Herbs. You do have a few. Thin leaves tucked away in the corner of your cottage, saved for days when sickness creeps through the air like a rumour. They mean something. They protect in quiet ways, but the door will not fix itself, and you have learned that security in small things sometimes outweighs the abstract protection of remedies. You agree to the trade, though a faint absurdity brushes the edge of your thoughts. Herbs for metal, thread for a hinge, bread as repayment for strength. Famine reorganizes the world like a clerk reorganizing a ledger, crossing out old values, rewriting new ones in cramped, precise script. The blacksmith works while you wait. Sparks rise in brief, bright gestures before extinguishing in midair. You watch them fall, imagining how even fire seems tired now, its energy rising in small bursts instead of great flames. When he finishes, he hands you the new hinge. It is uneven but sturdy, the kind of work only possible with limited materials and steady hands. You thank him with a quiet sincerity. He nods once, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. On your way home, you pass a group of villagers sorting through communal supplies distributed from the manor. A pile of barley sits on a tarp, each family allowed to take a measured portion. The steward oversees the process, marking names on his list with detached precision. Children hover nearby like small shadows, their eyes following each scoop of grain as if studying a kind of slow ritual. Your name is called and you step forward. The steward hands you a portion exactly the size declared last week. It looks smaller today, though you suspect that is just the eye adjusting to scarcity. You bow slightly, then step aside. The grain settles into your sack with a muted weight, almost apologetic. As you turn away, you see an old man struggling to carry his share. His hands tremble, the sack slipping inch by inch. You move toward him, offering your arm. He accepts without protest. Together you carry the grain to his doorway, each of you breathing in short, careful sequences. At the threshold, he insists on giving you something in return. Half a candle, no more than a stub. You try to refuse, but he presses it into your hand with the quiet authority of someone who understands the necessity of balanced exchanges. So you take it, not because you need it, but because he needs the trade to feel complete. Back at your cottage, you scatter your collected items across the table and look at them. A hinge, a small portion of grain, a stub of candle, a piece of stale bread. This is your ledger for the day. These are your earnings. They do not feel like wealth, but they are not nothing. You sit down, elbows on your knees, and exhale slowly. You consider the decisions you've made, each one sensible on its own, each one tinged with absurdity, when viewed from a distance, thread for metal herbs for repairs, strength traded for bread. Value has become fluid, bending to the demands of the moment. Famine teaches a logic no one enjoys naming. It rearranges priorities with a quiet, relentless efficiency. You learn to measure worth not in comfort but in usefulness, not in sentimental attachment but in survival's exact currency. As the day fades into a damp evening, you secure the new hinge onto the door. It hangs crookedly but closes with certainty. You test it twice, then sit back and allow a rare moment of satisfaction. It holds. It will hold tomorrow too. Later, you light the stub of candle, watching its tiny flame gather itself with humility. You place your small ration of bread beside the grain and herbs. They look modest on the table, but in their modesty, they speak a truth you have grown quietly intimate with. Survival is built on small bargains, none glorious, all necessary. You lie down on your mattress, the faint warmth of the candle flickering across the ceiling. In its small circle of light, the world seems momentarily organized, every trade accounted for, every decision filed in the ledger of continuity. You breathe, slow and tired, knowing that tomorrow will ask for more choices. Choices that feel both sensible and absurd. Choices that keep you alive. Choices that no one speaks aloud until they must. Morning arrives in its usual muted way, drifting into the cottage without asking permission, settling across the floorboards like another task waiting to be completed. You sit for a moment at the table, looking at the hinge you installed days ago. It holds steady, crooked, but reliable. One of the few things in your life that behaves predictably. Your hands rest against the grain of the wood, fingers tracing lines worn smooth by years of use. There is a small, tired steadiness in you today, the kind that doesn't come from strength but from routine. When you step outside, the air carries the faint chill of a season that has forgotten how to progress. The dampness no longer surprises you. It greets you with the same resigned familiarity as an old clerk stamping another entry into an endless ledger. You tighten your cloak, feeling the slight weight of it pull against your shoulders, and begin the slow walk toward your patch of land. The fields spread ahead like a faded map, lines blurred, colours washed out. The soil looks swollen from months of water, dark and heavy, as if it's reluctant to be touched still. You walk toward it, boots sinking into the softened earth, each step producing the quiet, yielding sound that has become synonymous with this year. In your hand are the seeds you've saved, small, pale things, tucked into your palm like withheld breath. You look down at them and feel a strange mixture of reluctance and duty. They are not many. They are not particularly strong. Some are cracked along the edges. Others feel too light, as though the life inside them is fragile enough to be mistaken for dust. Yet you carry them with the deliberate care one gives to small hopes. When you reach the furrows, you kneel with the slow attention of someone handling fragile documents. Your knees sink into the damp soil. The sensation is cool and familiar. You press your hand into the earth, feeling its texture give way beneath your fingers. There is no promise in the soil, not this year. It is too wet, too tired, too swollen with rains that refuse to stop. Still, you inhale the faint scent rising from it. Wet clay, old roots, the ghost of growth that used to be certain. You begin to work the soil with the same motions you've repeated every season since childhood. Your hands move gently, almost automatically, breaking small clumps and smoothing patches that resist your touch. The effort drains you faster than it once did. Your breath comes in measured intervals, and your arms ache earlier than you'd like to admit. But you continue, because this is what the body remembers to do when thinking becomes too heavy. The first seed leaves your hand and drops into the shallow furrow with a quiet, unimpressive sound. You cover it lightly, pressing the soil down with the weight of your palm. The gesture feels ceremonial, though the ceremony is modest, more acknowledgement than expectation. A seed planted in such earth is less a plan and more an act of defiance carried out in whispers. You plant another, and another. Each one falls into the ground like a small question asked without confidence in the answer. Somewhere behind you, someone else is working. A neighbour, bent over their own patch of land, moving with the same slow, patient exhaustion that has become the rhythm of the village. They don't speak, neither do you. Conversation feels unnecessary when actions already speak in the same tone. Measured, quiet, functional. The sounds you share are simple. The soft drag of hands through earth, the occasional exhale, the muted shift of weight from one knee to the other. You pause at one point, pulling back your sleeve to wipe your forehead. The air is cool, but the work warms you just enough to make your skin damp. You stare at the seeds remaining in your hand and feel the faint absurdity of it all. Planting into a field that has forgotten its purpose, offering effort to a season that no longer responds, and yet you cannot imagine doing otherwise. Habit has become a fortress. Not strong, but consistent. Hope in times like this shrinks into something thin and thread-like. It doesn't shine, it barely glows. It behaves like a candle lit in a room, long abandoned, its flame too small to change the air, but bright enough to keep you from surrendering to the dark entirely. Planting feels like lighting that candle, not because you believe it will dispel anything, but because the act itself insists on continuity. You press another seed into the soil with your thumb, feeling the faint tremor of fatigue travel up your arm. Your breath shortens, but you adjust your pace rather than stopping. The body has learned new metrics for endurance, short bursts of effort interspersed with long quiet pauses. You pause now, resting your palms on your thighs, letting the air settle in your chest before continuing. A crow lands on a nearby post, cocking its head in your direction. You stare at each other for a moment, sharing a kind of practical curiosity. The bird seems to be evaluating the possibility of food where none exists. You seem to be evaluating the possibility of harvest where none is promised. The crow hops once, as if deciding the matter for both of you, then takes flight, leaving a faint disturbance in the quiet air. You return to your work, placing the last few seeds in the ground with care that feels disproportionate to their likelihood of survival. But effort, even when disproportionate, has become its own kind of sustenance. When the final seed is covered, you sit back on your heels and rest. Your breath comes shallow, your hands coated in mud that dries slowly in the open air. The field looks no different now than it did before you started. Still waterlogged, still swollen, still holding its silence. But you know what lies beneath the surface, and that knowledge, however fragile, places a small weight in your chest that is not entirely despair. Rising takes time. You push yourself up with both hands, your body arguing softly at each movement. When you stand, the world tilts slightly, then stabilizes. You look at your land, an unremarkable plot of earth that asks for everything and gives almost nothing. But today it feels a little less empty, not hopeful, just a little less empty. The walk back to the village is slow. Each step presses into the damp earth, leaving a shallow footprint that fills with water almost immediately. The village comes into view, hunched cottages, drifting smoke, figures bent over chores, and you feel the faint tug of recognition that has replaced comfort. Inside your cottage, you sit on the stool by the hearth and rest your hands in your lap. Mud flakes off your skin in small fragile pieces. Your breathing is steady again, though its rhythm remains thin. You look at the dirt under your nails, the faint stains on your sleeves, and the small ache in your back. These are the marks of the day's work, modest though it was. No one will praise the act of planting. No one expects miracles. The famine has taught you that hope is not a declaration, but a gesture. A seed pressed into unwilling earth. A candle lit in a room that has forgotten what light is. You lean back, letting the quiet of the cottage settle around you like a second layer of air. The seeds are in the ground. They may not rise, but they exist now, as possibilities, however slim. And in a year defined by loss and shortage, possibility, even the thinnest kind, is something worth holding in your hands, however gently you must hold it. The evening settles over the village with the same indifferent weight it has carried for months, a slow dimming rather than a descent. You move through your cottage with habitual motions, brushing soil from your sleeves, placing the last of your tools near the door, checking the hinge that still holds its angle. The air has grown cooler again, though not sharply. Just another quiet reminder that days slip past without distinct edges. Now you light the small stub of candle the old man gave you, watching its reluctant flame gather itself on the wick, a small brightness surrounded by a great deal of grey. You sit at the table for a while, hands resting in your lap. The room carries a faint mixture of damp wood, smoke residue, and the scent of earth still clinging to your clothes. Nothing here changes quickly. Each object seems suspended in the same tireless pause. Even your own breath feels measured, as though the cottage and your body have begun sharing a rhythm designed to conserve effort. Outside, the rain begins again, soft at first, like fingers tapping gently on the roof, then steadier, settling into the familiar cadence that has become more reliable than any clock you listen without irritation. The sound no longer announces anything. It merely confirms that the world continues to operate in its quiet, saturated manner. The rain has stopped feeling like weather. It feels like policy, an ongoing condition that shapes everything without requiring permission. You rise from the stool and move toward the corner where your bedding lies. The straw shifts under your hands, slightly damp despite your best attempts to keep it dry. You smooth it anyway, the gesture small and automatic. Lying down takes longer than it should. Your limbs move with the careful deliberation of someone lowering themselves into cold water. When you finally settle, the mattress gives a faint, tired rustle beneath you. The candle flickers on the far side of the room, casting faint, slow-moving shadows across the walls. The light is too weak to illuminate anything fully. It simply outlines familiar shapes, the stool, the door, the basin, giving them a softened presence. You watch the flame sway, a quiet figure performing its own restrained ceremony. That small glow feels like the last protest against the long stretch of dimness that has defined this year. As you lie there, the rain's rhythm fills the space between breaths. It settles around you like a second layer of air, dense but gentle. You don't resist it. The sound is routine now, an anchor that keeps your thoughts from drifting too far. If silence ever returned, you suspect it would feel foreign. Time moves differently these days, not forward so much as outward, expanding in soft, indistinct layers. You've stopped marking weeks or months. The old calendar, once tied to sowing, harvests, festivals, has dissolved into a cycle of tasks repeated not because they are timely, but because they are necessary. You tend the soil because tending soil is what you have always done, not because it answers the season. The year itself no longer signals anything. It has become a long, unbroken continuation, blurred at the edges like ink that seeped into damp parchment. You close your eyes and feel the weight of the day settle across your body. It isn't heavy in the painful way, but in the way of something that has simply accumulated over too many hours. Your muscles offer soft objections, as if filing small, polite reports on what they have carried. You listen to them with the same patience you give the rain. Everything now feels like a conversation held in low tones. A faint draft moves through the cottage, slipping under the door like an uninvited guest. It brushes the side of your face, cool enough to make you shift slightly under the blanket. You tuck the cloth closer around your shoulders, though you know it will only help marginally. Warmth is no longer something you expect, only something you acknowledge when it occasionally happens. Your thoughts drift to the seeds you planted earlier. They are buried now in the heavy soil. Their chance is uncertain. You do not dwell on them long. Hope, even thin hope, is something you treat carefully, like grain measured by the handful. It must be used sparingly. Yet the memory of pressing seeds into the earth provides a faint, steady warmth. Not optimism exactly, but continuity. The simple knowledge that you made the gesture at all. A rustling sound echoes faintly from a neighbouring cottage, someone shifting in their sleep perhaps, or perhaps tending a fire. In this village, sounds travel quietly, carrying stories without needing words. You imagine others lying in their beds now, listening to the same rain, counting breaths in the same unhurried rhythm. You imagine them moving through their days in the same slow choreography, pacing strength, measuring every small decision. Each of you lives inside your own cottage, but the famine pulls all of your routines into alignment, like beads sliding onto the same worn string. You shift slightly, feeling the ache in your legs, a dull, persistent sensation that takes its place beside hunger, beside fatigue, beside the quiet insistence of the rain. These sensations no longer feel separate. They merge into the background of existence, the body adapting to a new equilibrium it never asked for. The candle flickers again, the wick bending slightly under the weight of its own flame. It reminds you of how people speak now, low, careful, stretching words so they last longer. Light behaves the same way, rationing itself, burning in small increments, as if it knows it should not give too much at once. You watch until the flame stabilizes. You feel a faint gratitude for its persistence. As the night deepens, you focus on your breath, letting each inhale fill your chest just enough to maintain balance. Exhaling feels like a quiet release, a soft gesture towards sleep. Your thoughts grow slower, their edges smoothing as exhaustion weaves through them. The rain keeps its steady pace, neither quickening nor weakening, a perfect example of monotony that has learned how to be soothing. You realize then, in a brief moment of clarity, that the famine has become a kind of calendar, not one that marks beginnings or endings, but one that marks endurance. Each day measured, not by the sun or the season, but by how well you ration strength, how quietly you trade, how gently you let hope settle without demanding too much from it. The passing of time no longer depends on changes in the world outside. It depends on the steadiness with which you continue. You breathe in again, long and slow, the air filling your lungs with its familiar dampness. The thought of tomorrow does not raise questions or worries. It simply arrives in your mind as a continuation, a page that looks very much like the one before it. There is a kind of comfort in that sameness, even if it is a tired comfort. Predictability, even bleak predictability, is easier to hold than chaos. Your eyelids grow heavier. The candle guttering in the corner throws one last elongated shadow against the wall before shrinking into a softer flame. You let your body sink further into the bedding, the straw making its quiet, settling sound beneath you. The rain's steady tapping guides your breath into a slower pattern, almost hypnotic. You drift towards sleep, not with expectation, but with the calm acceptance that comes when nothing surprises you anymore. The cottage, the village, the year, they all share the same unbroken tone. A long cadence that neither rises nor falls. You match it without effort. The year does not end, not in any way that feels significant. It simply continues, quiet and methodical, and you continue with it. Tomorrow will repeat itself, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. The famine moves through its days the way you move through yours, steadily, without flourish, without pause. You close your eyes as the rain marks the hours and let sleep settle in the same slow way everything else does now. Softly, gradually, without surprise. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.